Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most gracious, the ever merciful. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here. And we're going to talk about some aspects from the Quran. And to be specific, going to talk about some lessons learned from the Quran, which are not very different from the lessons that we can learn from our previous scriptures as well. Because at the very outset, the Quran tells us that it is a series, it is the last in the series of books that were revealed by the Almighty. And from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find that the Almighty had said one thing, that the religion that will be brought by all prophets of God would be virtually the same. So the religion which is presented in the Quran and the way it has been presented, it is exactly the same as what the previous prophets did present. The difference between perhaps the Quran and the previous scriptures is just one, and that is, whilst the previous scriptures have not been preserved in their original language, we have the Quran being revealed and preserved in its original language. So the lesson that I will talk about, or the lessons I will talk about today, I can term them as some forgotten lessons that we need to revisit and remind ourselves. The first lesson that I would like to draw your attention to vis-a-vis the Quran is a verse from the Quran, which in effect means that all mankind is the progeny of a single parent, Adam and Eve. And as such, this is a huge information which the Quran gives us, that because we are the progeny of Adam and Eve, all of us are in fact one human family. So it's like being a global family inhabiting the planet Earth. And it's not just that we are perhaps citizens of the United States or the country that we live in. Our status is also that we are citizens of this globe. We are members of this huge human family. And so the Quranic words, to be precise, are Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa unsa, which means that, O mankind, we have created you from a single pair of man and woman, which of course Adam and Eve, signifying the fact that all of us are equal as human beings. Our first introduction to one another is that we are human beings at the same level. We deserve equal respect. And as far as people are concerned who might have a higher status in the eyes of God, the Almighty says that this is something which only God can know and none of us can have access to. So the first lesson which is drawn as a result of this premise is that we cannot be judgmental, we cannot judge people directly. As far as the judge is concerned, he is the one and only God. So we need to understand that as humankind, as members of mankind, as members of this fraternity, all of us have been born equal and all of us deserve equal respect. And as far as any higher status or preference is concerned, the Almighty says that this is something which is based on piety, and this is something which only God Himself can know. And as a result, we need to mind our own business in most cases. And if we have to judge anyone, I would say, because judging comes to us naturally, it should be our own selves. So we have the complete data, the most complete data about our own selves. And of course, we have so much scanty data about other people, and it's always easy to make that decision or judgment. So if any judgment has to be made, let us turn that telescope of picking the faults of others inside, and let us pick our own faults and see where we stand before God. So the first lesson, I would say, that needs this, I would say, reminder, or it's like a revisitation, is that mankind has been created by God as a global family. And as this global family progresses, the concern that we should have for each other should be regardless of religion, race, geographical boundaries. So just as we have that care and affection for our brother and sister who belong to our own family, a similar care and concern should be for every member of this planet. Every person who inhabits this planet is someone who we should be concerned of. So if there are earthquakes in far off areas that we might not be connected to, there could be bushfires, there could be some other calamities, it should raise our eyebrows also. It should bother us as well, because we are living in this sea of humankind, and as one small wave of this sea, we have to contribute our little bit as much as we can in this whole human fraternity. The second important thing which the Quran stresses and which we may at times forget is that we have to be people who must always uh, follow the calls of our own conscience. The conscience never lies. The conscience that we have, it seldom lies unless, of course, it has been lulled to sleep, and that is generally a punishment. But the inner barometer that each one of us has is that conscience which is always aware of what good and evil are. So, goodness and evil is something which has been ingrained in ourselves. And the Quran, at one instance, says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, which means that the awareness of good and evil is found in every single human being. It's not just Muslims or Jews or Christians, it's every single human being. So, all human beings are united in this aspect that basic universal human truths are something that we all conform to. So, justice, awareness, kindness, sympathy, being compassionate to one another, these are human values that we share as human beings. And the divide here, once again, is that we have to understand that our first exposure to human beings is that of being a human being. So I can slightly phrase it in a way that I can say that our first religion, in fact, is humanity. And if we are not good human beings, we cannot be good Christians or Jews or Muslims or any denomination that we belong to. So our first step towards betterment is that we have to realize that this bond of humanity in which we all share these common human values is something so universal that even people who don't believe in God, I mean, such a vast commonality that even people who don't believe in God, who are Gnostics or atheists, even they conform to these human ideals of justice, truth, and righteousness. So, this also brings us to this very important question that as far as the truth is concerned, as far as righteousness is concerned, the Quran calls it to be something that we all must aspire for. We have to be seekers of the truth. We have to be people who are always worried about finding the truth. So, finding the truth, abiding by the truth, siding by the truth is something that all of us have to aspire for, because as far as truth is concerned, it's like God's representative on earth. God Himself is called Al-Haq in the Quran, which is the absolute truth. So something that He Himself is, He would like all of us to adhere to as well. And in this regard, the standard which has been fixed by the Quran is so lofty, I would say. For example, it says at one place that you have to be bearers of the truth and of justice as well. And the words of the Quran are, وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ, even if adhering to the truth is against your own interest. Because at times when you speak the truth, when you abide by the truth, or you uphold justice, at times dent your own interest. So the Quran says, no, if truth is on one side and your own interest is on the other side, you have to side by the truth. And the next thing it says is, awil walidain, even if it is against the interest of your parents. So we can all imagine that we are the most attached to our parents. But the Quran says that even if the truth is something which is on one side and you yourself and your parents and your relatives are on the other side, then it has to be the truth that you need to side to. So, such is the absolute nature of the Quran, or the exhortation it gives, that truth has this precedence in every affair. And I think there's one step forward which the Quran also takes, and it at one place says that you have to be just and truthful even to your rivals, even to your enemies. So at one place it says, La yajrimannakum shana'anu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu, which means that the enmity of a nation or the animosity of a nation should not drive you to be unjust to that nation or to that people. So I think this is one of the highest standards of truth and justice that we are faced, or we have been told by the Quran, and at times we are not able to realize this, that truth and justice is something which we have to be we have to conform to, and even if it goes against our own interest, and truth and justice is again something that we have to administer even to our rivals. So if we are in a situation of in a place of a judge in which maybe we are giving some verdict and we have a rival standing right in front of us, he might have harmed us in the past. This is this is absolutely not the way that at that instance you remember that past enmity, that past animosity, and you say, yes, this is the time to settle my score. No, absolutely not. So adhering to the truth, adhering to justice is something which is absolutely, as I said, in line with the conscience that we have, because our conscience never lies unless, as I said, it is lulled to sleep. But in normal circumstances, our own conscience is the best judge. In fact, we don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to go anywhere. It's just thinking about right and wrong and just asking yourself. The red light within us, it lights up if we do something bad, if we do something evil. So I would say the second lesson learned from the Quran would be that we have to follow the calls of our conscience, we have to be truthful, we have to be just, and in this, the highest form or the highest standards of righteousness have to be conformed to. The third lesson that I'd like to present before you as, as a lesson that, again, we might have forgotten, is that all of us are faced with the hardships, sorrows, maybe because of the departure of a very loved one. It could be a financial stress that we have. It could be illness that we could have been passing through. So things are not always going the way we would like to go them. Often we end up disappointed. Often we end up dejected. Often we end up sorrowful and even complaining to God. But it is here that the Quran tells us that one of the best ways to, one of the best antidotes to sorrow, one of the best antidotes to your own disappointment is what we call, or what we can call, gratitude therapy. So, and in simple words, it only means that whenever we are sorrowful, whenever we are sad, whenever we are disappointed, we need only to look at the blessings of God that all of us have. They are so tremendous, aren't they? I mean, just look at the eyes that we have. We take them for granted. We can walk easily. Look at people who are lame, who are not able to walk. Look at people who cannot see. And I can tell you, there are so many people living on this planet Earth that who are passing through these circumstances. So there are people who are born blind, they don't even know what eyesight is. But there are a number of people who know what eyesight is because they have gradually lost their eyesight. So, one way to find out how blindness can treat you is to just shut your eyes, close your eyes for, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes, and start doing whatever you are doing, eating, or maybe going from one room to another, changing your clothes. And in a few minutes, you'll realize how big a gift these eyes are and how much we do take them for granted. So you see, if we start counting the blessings of God, which the Quran itself at one instance says, it says, "In ta'uddu ni'matallahi la tuhsuha," which means that if you start counting the blessings of God, they're enormous, they're numerous. Your counting will end, but the blessings of God will not end. So, the biggest antidote to disappointment, dejection, is to look at what we have instead of looking at what we don't have. Because if we do that, what we have is something which will easily outnumber what we don't have. And I mean, it's just a question of opening our eyes, opening our ears, and just observing people around us, how at times they are miserable. Almost 30% of the people, or even more, they say they live below the poverty line, even today, which means that these basic necessities of life, like, for example, food, shelter, clothing, education, health, they don't have access to that. And all of us, Alhamdulillah, God be praised, all of us are generally in a position that we have been educated in a very nice way. We have the best of the clothes to wear. We have access to health facilities and all these things. But what happens is that we take them for granted. And we think that, well, because we've been born with these facilities, perhaps they were always there for us, or maybe we deserve them. And in front of our eyes, we see there are so many circumstances in which we find people who were blessed with these all these favors and gifts of God, and then somehow they were deprived of them. And then, of course, their pride and their arrogance, of course, which led them to this audacity to think that, well, if they have been blessed by God, even if they are evil, then there must be something somewhere must be good in their life, because God has blessed them with these facilities, without realizing that God's blessings or His trials and tribulations are something which are part of His test, uh, from which we are going through, or through which we are all going. So we have to understand that as far as life is concerned, navigating through life, the circumstances that we are going to go through this life are always multifarious. And when we are happy, we forget the sad moments that we might have passed in our past. Similarly, when we are sad, we forget that there were times in the past when we were pretty happy and we were pretty okay. So you see, It's a question of correcting our own attitude. It's a question of being thankful for so much that we have. So I remember a little while ago that I had an aunt who ultimately died of lung cancer, and I actually was at his or her bedside when she passed away. And in fact, I was attending to her in her last moments as well, the last 10 or 15 days. And any one of you who might have seen a lung cancer patient passing away, or maybe heard of it, of such a patient, would know that for a patient who has this lung cancer, slowly the space in the lungs it decreases, and you have to voluntarily draw your breath. So every time that you draw your breath, it's not an involuntary process, it's a voluntary process. And you can imagine that every time that you draw a breath, you need to make an effort for that, for drawing that breath. How torturous it is, and how easy for us it is that we are drawing breaths. I mean, 6 or 7 of them or 8 of them every minute, maybe even more. And we don't even have to do anything, no effort at all, simply because it's like an automated process. And I could see my aunt every time that she would take a breath or draw a breath, she would pass through that torture of making a intention that yes, now the next time is coming and the next breath is coming. So it was really, really something that I witnessed from my own eyes, and I had to thank God a lot. And I said, look at me, that I am drawing these breaths without even realizing that I'm breathing actually. So breathing is something, is such a blessing that we have. Uh, one very funny thing is that forgetfulness is normally not a good thing, but then it is a good thing as well. Why? Because don't we forget our miseries? Don't we forget our worries? We have the greatest of miseries and worries at times afflicted to us. And it becomes so difficult for us to pass through them. But as time passes, I mean, maybe 5 days or 6 days or maybe a month or so, suddenly we realize that something that we were so terribly faced with and which we thought that we would never come along with, it has become very easy for us to bear that. So, time, as they say, is the best healer. Forgetfulness is a blessing. We forget our miseries, the greatest of miseries that we have gone through, we at times just forget them. So, these are tiny things that we have to realize, that God has been so gracious to us, He has been too kind to us. So, if you have to live the life of a brave person, then the life of of a brave person is one in which that person is always counting his or her blessings, always looking at what he or she has. He or she is always in the positive attitude. The positivity is something which always takes the better of that person, and he or she is on the lookout, that look, how and where can I go and help these people. So the fourth lesson I would say after this, regarding the Quran, that I have learned, and I think many of you would agree, is that one of the virtues that you live through in life, and one of the virtues that we have to face in life, is, as I said, are these trials and tribulations. So just as we have to be thankful for what we don't have, another very important thing is that we have to show patience as well. So patience is something that God at times tests us with. And this brings me to that fourth important lesson, and that is, what if something unexpected happens? What if something which we never expected comes our way? So, all of us human beings, we have plans for our lives. We think that we are doing something, it should be rewarded in this way, or if we have planned for our lives, we should go this way. But on many occasions, it happens that things go wrong, and we are tried and tested. We go through certain problems and situations in which becomes virtually very difficult to deal with life. It is here that once again there is a lesson which is mentioned in the Quran that really can benefit us. So the words of the Quran are, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ, which means that at times something is extremely unhealthy for you. You dislike that thing. Whereas in the sight of God, if that things happens to you, it's for your own benefit, but you don't like it at that time. And similarly, you might like something to happen, but it doesn't happen, because for that thing to have happened, it might have been very grave for you. And then the verse ends by saying, "Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun." God knows and you know not. So you see, these trials and these tribulations and these tests through which we go, they have a very strong purpose. They have a very specific purpose. So one of those purposes is that we become stronger than before. So isn't it? When we pass through these trials, when we pass through these hard circumstances, yes, we don't like them. But once we are through them, we become a better person, we become a stronger person. Why? Because you see, there are certain latent abilities that we have which are below the threshold. They are just dormant, they're just sleeping. It is in the time of crisis when those abilities they suddenly come to surface, because you have to draw on your resources. You have to draw extra on your resources, and the abilities that you had were never going to come to surface in normal circumstances because the need was not there. In stringent circumstances, in times of crises, what happens is that those reserves are called upon, and that extra effort that you do adds to your to the fact that you become a person who can bear more trials, who becomes stronger than before. So you see, instead of running away from trials, instead of being disappointed that we are facing with certain trials, look at the positive side. That these trials make you stronger than before. They make you a better person than before. And not only that, they give you an opportunity to come closer to God. Because you see, when you're passing through these trials, when you're passing through these grave circumstances, you turn to God. You turn to God more, perhaps, than you would have turned to in normal circumstances. So there are means, there are at times a blessing in disguise. So although they might have stricken you in a very bad way, but at the same time, we have to realize that this is how we can grow in stature. We can come closer to God, and also realize this fact that yes, this world is a place of trial and test, and we have to pass this test because all of us are good in good circumstances. I mean, we are not pushed. After all, we are human beings. It's only in these tough circumstances, in these straitened circumstances, that all of us are tried and tested. So remember, God has always told us that yes, trial and test is part of your life. So being patient, being always looking out that there is something good hidden in whatever is happening, is what we need to do. Because as I just said, that at times what we do or what happens to us, it makes us miserable. But I think if all of us realize that there have been many instances in our lifetime that when you look in the past, in hindsight, we say, yes, if had this happened, I would have been doomed. I would have lost everything. And it is good that it happened and I went another way. So you see, what happens is that repeatedly God tells us that if He pushes you in another direction, then there is a certain plan that He's perhaps pursuing. At that particular moment, you have to trust Him. At times, the expediency or the wisdom behind that happening would not become apparent to you because we don't know what's going to happen. But later on, we do find out. We do find out that yes, this happens. So there is this famous incident which took place once, in which a person boarded an aircraft and he was supposed to go from one city to another city, and he was actually striking a very huge deal, a huge business deal. And when he came to the airport, the doors had already closed because he was caught up in a rush, in the traffic rush. So when he reached the airport, the doors were closed and he was not allowed to board the aircraft. And he raised a huge hue and cry at the airport and he said, well, I have a huge business deal. If I don't go there, if I don't honor my word, I'm just going to lose millions and millions of money, and that will be really bad for me. But the airline staff said, well, nothing doing. You are late, and so you have to just wait for the next flight. You know what happened? In 1 hour, news came of a huge crash of that aeroplane, and no one survived. And so it was a lesson that we can learn from this whole episode or this incident, that at times God has His own ways of saving you. He could have boarded the aircraft because he thought that he was going to make millions, without realizing that he would not be there to make those millions. So at times these are these strange ways of God in which He saves you. But what happens is that we become jittery. We don't realize that if something is happening, it is actually happening for our own benefit. And instead of trusting God at that moment, we end up complaining against God. So this is the fourth thing, that in trials and tribulations, in our tests that we go through, we have to be patient and we have to think that God is our benefactor. He is going to, if He's doing something for us or against us, it is for our own benefit. It is going to take place for our own advantage. And we just need to be patient. And as I said, there are so many instances, I'm sure, in your lives as well, in which when you look back and you think that, yes, if this had happened, I would have been somewhere else. And thank God it didn't happen, and now I'm in a better place. Okay, another important lesson which the Quran teaches us, and which as a something that we can all draw inspiration from, is the fact that all of us are living lives for our own selves generally, and this is nothing bad as well. So we have our own plans, we have our family, we have our children, we have our businesses. So we do plan and look after ourselves. This is, of course, something which is very natural. But then there is another thing which God wants us to do, and that is that besides looking after our own selves, besides caring for our own selves, we also need to look out for others as well. So, selfishness against selflessness. So, one of the things that we need to learn in life is that we have to become a person who is always at the giving end, who is, yes, of course, you are at the receiving end as well in certain circumstances, but to be a person who is always charitable, to be a person who is always generous, to be a person who is always caring about the society in which he is living in, or she is living in, is something which is of ultimate virtue. So, to be charitable, for example, one thing that at times hinders this charitability is that we shy away when we have something little to give to other people. Maybe you just look at your pocket and you say, "Well, I just have a couple of dollars to spare," and this at times becomes a hindrance in your charitability. So, the first lesson that we need to learn regarding charitability is that never shy away for whatever you have to give for God. It could be a penny, it could be a dime, it could be any small amount of money. But if this is what you can afford, then this is what your test is also. So never let's shy away, even if we have a very small amount. The other thing which is also mentioned in the Quran regarding charitability is that once you are charitable, once you have spent something for others, never boast about it, never brag about it, because as the Quran says, "La tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal aza," that if you express your favor to someone that you have done such and such a favor, it's not going to sit well with God. So it's something that you have done for that person, because you're making him you start reminding him of the fact that, look what I did to you. And this in itself is something which is not correct. So you do something for the sake of God. So don't express your favor on other people. Don't brag and boast this that you have done something, because if you've done something for God, it is best to do it secretly. The Quran tells us, yes, you spend for God openly and secretly, but to spend secretly is much better, because in this way you keep that good deed between yourself and between God. And it has that effect of being spiritually uplifted, to be spiritually even in a bigger position. So, another thing in regarding charitability, perhaps, which you would agree, is that I would say that money is the easiest thing to be charitable about. And it's more difficult to spend time. It's more difficult to, at times, give your part of your skill that you know for the cause of the betterment of humanity. So, I think that another thing that we need to understand is that it's being charitable is not just a question of giving money. It's a behavior, it's an attitude that all of us can adopt. So it's like being there for a person, even smiling for a person who is maybe in distress, giving that shoulder to that person who might wish to cry on your shoulder. So you see, to have that eye, to have that antenna that I would say is in our minds, to look after other people is something again which we must realize. And you know what? People who are in need, many of them come to you. They do come to us for money, maybe for other needs. But then there is a whole category of people. There is a whole category of people who doesn't even come to you. Why? Because they have such high self-esteem that they would rather sleep at night with empty stomachs than to go and beg for something that they would not have. So you see, it is such people that we need to find in the society. The Quran tells us that at times, because they are well dressed, they might be living in very comfortably. You think that they are very well placed in the society, and on most occasions, that is not the case. If you look more deeply, if you look more profoundly, you'll find that very person who seemed to be a very well off or maybe a very comfortably living person, he is faced with a number of trials and ordeals in life. He might not have enough money to pay his bills off, and he would be behaving as if he has, sufficient in a way that he's very grateful to God. So to spot these people, who are in need, but they are not going to come and ask for their needs, is a very important task that all of us should have. It's easy to discover people who come to you because they've already come to you. All that you need to do is investigate them. But people who are not going to come to you, I can tell you they are in large numbers. Because of having that esteem and self esteem, they would not come to you. So, looking after them, going after them, and trying our best to do what we can for them is something that we have to do. And I can suggest a very small measure that all of us can easily do, I think, and many of us, of you might already be doing that. And that is, look at your own houses and look at your own, the places that you live in, even your offices. You'll find so many things which are lying there spare, unused, and perhaps even forgotten. So one thing that can be suggested is that make a regular survey of the things that you have in our houses: your spare clothes, your spare shoes, spare furniture, spare medicines, stationery, crockery. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we have in our houses, in our homes, in our offices, in our other places, which are just lying there for the sake of nothing. And they could be useful for other people, and they have no use for us. So much so that at times we end up buying new things without realizing that we come back, we open our drawer, we have already have that thing with us earlier on because we just forgotten that. So you see, it's a question of regularly cleaning your drawers, cupboards, your houses, and perhaps making a space in the house, some place in the house where you regularly put those things which you don't use, so that it becomes, it will grow if you do this regularly. And maybe every month you're able to spare so many things and you can just give them away. And this is without any, without any expense at all. It's just the spare things that you have. So I think this is the minimum that we can do. But the maximum, of course, is there's no end to it. For example, the Quran says that the highest amount of charity, or the best, I would say the pinnacle of charity, is that you spend on others what you actually need yourself. So the Quran at one place says, "Yusiruna ala anfusihim walau kana bihim khasasa," which means that they are people who give preference to others. They would sacrifice their own needs. They would give away what they need maybe tomorrow, and this would happen that they would just give that person what that person needs. And I have heard from so many people in my life that when people ended up sacrificing their own needs, somehow or the other, it was God who came to their rescue. And without even thinking that they would have been blessed with so much amount, they were repaid manyfold for what they did for other people. So it's like just trusting God. And many people have told me this, that if you want to experience God, you cannot touch Him, you cannot see Him. But if you want to experience God, try this out. Give away what you have for the cause of God. If that person is in such a need, in such a dire need, and you're also in a dire need, so you like holding preference to your own self or to that person. And if you hold preference to that person, so many people have narrated this experience that when you give preference to others, it is the Almighty who then comes down on earth and He replenishes your empty pocket in such a way that you would not even imagine that you have that money. So it's like it is here that you experience God, that yes, there is a God who is taking care of your needs because of the charitability that you had done. And then I would say that this selflessness, or this attitude of altruism or thinking about others is not hard to find. Whenever I hear that siren of a fire brigade going on the roads, I immediately picture this. Well, these are people who are going to save lives. These are unsung heroes of the society. They are not as famous as big names, like, for example, the famous names that who are very famous, who have become famous in this field, like, for example, Mother Teresa or the likes of her. They are small. They are unknown people. They are people who are not very famous. They are unsung heroes. But nonetheless, the things that they do, you must be remembering when that incident happened in 9/11. There was a group of firefighters who plunged themselves in that on the World Trade Center, in that inferno, thinking that there might be a couple of people alive there, and maybe they could come and save them. And they knew that they themselves would never come back because they were plunging into that inferno. They had this intense desire of saving humankind. And it could be a very small thing, but you see how our trust in humanity is revived every now and then because of such small incidents. That people saving the lives of other people, sacrificing their own lives. They might not be very prominent, but this small act makes them, such good people that you even call them saints. And lastly, I would say that the biggest thing that you can really be inspired from regarding this selflessness or this altruism is someone that all of us have in our own homes and society, in our own houses generally. And that is the person of your mother. She's an embodiment of selflessness, isn't she? I mean, all of us, alhamdulillah, might be having mothers. Some mothers might have passed away. So it makes an even important point that the mothers who are alive, please be attentive to their needs, because they're going to pass away one day and you'd be regretting the opportunity that you had. So look at, if you want to learn selflessness, if you want to be a selfless person, you need not look anywhere but to your mother. The way she has spent her life is something which is like an open book to all of us. She has sacrificed her needs. She has sacrificed her sleep. I mean, she has sacrificed so many things. I can narrate to you an incident which in which I mean, it's a horrible incident actually. It's really a nerve-wracking incident. So this happened in one town, that there were people, there were their boys and girls, or one of the child started beating the parents so much that he thought actually that he has a certain share in the property inheritance of their father or mother, and he was being deprived, or some dispute was there, and he became so frustrated that he started to beat up his parents, and of course they had nothing but to defend themselves. And once this whole scenario actually finished, and he realized his mistake, you know what? The first thing which happened, the mother said, "Well, I forgive you because you have done this out of your own emotional frenzy. I'm sure you would realize that you have done something wrong, and before you even come to me for forgiveness, because I'm your mother, I'm going to forgive you for that." So you see, this is how at times mothers behave, that suffering the worst at the hands of their own parents, suffering of their children, even then they are so forgiving, even then they are so selfless. So I think selflessness and altruism is something that all of us need to learn from our parents. And remember, these parents are a blessing of God. The more time that we can spend with them, the more the vibes that we can gain from them and we give to them is something which is unmatched. And these are only a few moments that we might be having, because of course everyone has to go away from this earth. So giving our best to our parents, not making them realize that they are a burden on us, especially if they've grown old, and especially if they might be needing our care. So this is another thing, that as humanity itself, as history repeats itself, remember that all of us were helpless individuals in their laps. And it was because of their care and affection that we have become what we have become. So when they grow old, it's time to repay. I mean, we cannot repay them. We simply cannot. But at least we should be there for them. We should be able to help them as far as is possible. So I would end my talk here, and just maybe, if I remember correctly, I'm just going to repeat some of the lessons I think that I have learned from the Quran, and I can tell you, because I also teach the Bible and some of the previous scriptures, that these lessons are not just specific to the Quran, as I just said in the beginning. So these moral lessons are something which all prophets of God, all the previous books spoke of. And here you would realize that as far as the Quran is concerned, because it is the last or the final testament of God, we have it preserved in its original language. So we are more, I mean, we can rely more, but this doesn't mean that we are to discard the previous scriptures. So if they're read in the light of the Quran, as I said, you'll find so much in common in between them, so much, things which have the same theme in them, that you'll immediately realize that they come from the same source. Of course, they come from God. So just to recap, the first thing I think, if I remember correctly, I spoke of is that the first lesson that we have forgotten as humankind is that all of us are human beings, and all of us are equal human beings in the sight of God. And our first religion is actually humanity, to come close to one another on the basis of being human beings. And then uh, realizing this fact that as far as judging people is concerned, this is not our job, this is not our domain, this is God's domain. And if we have to judge anyone, it has to be our own selves. So let us judge our own selves if we have to judge anyone. Then I spoke about the fact that one of the lessons that the Quran has taught us is we have to be people who follow our own conscience. Our own conscience is something which never lies. It always guides us in the right direction. We must follow that connection. And that connection is something which always keeps us alive, and it always keeps us connected to God. Thirdly, I spoke of, if I remember correctly, that as far as our sorrows and problems are concerned, the best antidote to sorrows and these problems is what we call gratitude therapy. So being grateful for what we have and just forgetting about what we don't have, because what we have outnumbers what we don't have. is one of the biggest ways that you can deal with disappointment, depression, and dejection. I spoke about patience, that how patience elevates us in the eyes of God, and we should not run away from those trials. We should be patient in those trials, because those trials are like adverse winds, which at times are meant to take us even higher. So if we realize that these trials are making us stronger than before, and of course, at the same time, they are making us a better individual, then this is not a bad deal at all. I spoke about charitability and selflessness as well, that this is something that we can start. As they say, charity begins at home. So let's be more charitable by just simply sifting out things that we don't use and just donating them as much as we can, and maybe going as far as to spend things that we might need ourselves, but because that is the highest form of charity. And one thing that I'm going to add here is, again, something that we can do, and I think many people here living here, they already perhaps have signed up for that, and that is, being charitable is not something that we can confine or make it remain confined to this world. We can even be charitable once we pass away. You know how? By donating our organs. So organ donation is something that all of us must consider, that today our skin, our eyes, our liver, many other body parts are now, they are preserved immediately. Once you make that will, people will come, the authorities, they will take away the organs that you can donate. So this is one thing that we can all do even after we pass away. You see, these organs are not going to be any good for us. We're just going to be, buried. So why not make this effort and make this donation, that whilst we are living, we sign up all those organs for the betterment of mankind, so that imagine a person who is blind and his world is lit up. His world is lit up because of your cornea. His world is lit up because of that small will that you made, and you could have it transplanted. So these were some of the lessons that I talked about. One thing I also would like to add before I end my talk is that one of the important ways to connect to God, because you see, all these things that we have just talked about, they require a very strong will. They require a very strong, require strong determination. And this strong determination to do what the right thing is cannot be done without having that strong God connection. So the Quran at one place says, "Wama sabruka illa billah," that this patience and this steadfastness that you need to combat a lot of things in life cannot be without you having a strong God connection. So to have a strong God connection is something that we all must think about. And one of the premier ways of having or achieving that God connection is by reading the Quran, by connecting ourselves to the Almighty, and understanding what the message that He has for us. Because oftentimes what we do is, I'm talking mostly about Muslims, that we neglect what the Quran has actually, the message of the Quran for us, because of the fact that the Quran is in Arabic, and we tend to shy away from reading Arabic, or we just confine ourselves to reading Arabic without understanding what the message of the Quran is, that we end up in this mess. So understanding what your Lord is talking to you about. Remember, this is someone, not me or you or someone from this earth. This is God talking to you. So if you have this feeling that God is talking to you, and He's going to, strengthen you as well when you read about Him, when you talk to Him, you will have that urge to come closer to Him. So to come closer to Him by reading the Quran, by offering our prayers regularly, by being charitable, and by always reinforcing the calls of our conscience, this is something which can really go a long way in making us God-conscious people, in making us people who are connected not only to God, but to the brethren or our own fraternity that He has created. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.